The Bloomington-Normal Water Reclamation District has big projects ahead. They could be expanding into a nearby town. The department is using a $5 million grant to fund a 2-mile stretch of new sewer interceptor that collects wastewater on Bloomington-Normal's west side. That interceptor will help with sewer water collection between Oakland Avenue in Bloomington North to College Avenue in Normal. The Water District's director says a new one hasn't been built in West Bloomington since the 1960s.
By building the second interceptor, we're essentially adding about 20 million gallons per day of sewage that can be brought to our facility. We're essentially planning for the next 25, 50 to 100 years of economic growth.
Mr. Irvin, who you just heard from, says phase one of that $22 million project should cost around $7.5 million. The grant will help offset some of that cost. The interceptor will eventually connect to Hudson. Those details will be finalized over the next year.